Hey guys, and good morning and welcome to a cold, windy Saturday in the studio. Today I'm going to do something a couple of people have asked me to do actually, and it's something I need to do for myself for a quick project, and that is I'm going to take you through airbrushing a Space Marine from start, in terms of it being just undercoated, to finish in terms of the point where you would then pick up the brush and progress the miniature on. And because I've now reached a certain level of subscribers and I can do proper videos, so thank you for that, I'm going to try and do it in real time while you're watching, without boring you to tears. So there's no fancy editing, there's no music or anything. I'll probably try and fill a lot of the silence with waffle, but I am hoping that I can show you quite quickly from start to finish how you can go about preparing your miniature. So quickly, first just talking about my setup. I'm going to use a Harder & Steenbeck Infinity with a 0.15 needle in it today. My airbrush stand is a Harder & Steenbeck airbrush stand. I believe they make the best of everything, but that's just personal opinion. I have got here a tub of warm soapy water, which is how I'm going to change my colours. I have here a small pot of fresh water. I have a brush, an old battered brush to mix in the paint cups, and then I'm going to use a wooden miniature holder to put our Blood Angel Librarian in, ready for painting. Let's just do that now actually. So the miniature is one of the awesome Space Hulk miniatures, and then I've converted all the Blood Angels Terminators in my first company from these. So this is a standard Space Hulk Terminator Librarian with additional bits of stuff off the Blood Angels kits added to him just to make him a bit more class. And we are going to do him in the standard classic Blood Angels colours. So blue Librarian armour with the red shoulder pads and stuff. So I am using a standard AS10 compressor without a tank, which you can hear every once in a while kicking in the background there. I'm using a Sparmax bullet inline moisture trap. These are really important. It doesn't have to be Sparmax, but an inline moisture trap is vital when you're airbrushing. And that's it. So let's run through the process first of all of how we actually go about doing this. When you're airbrushing, it's best to work in a sequence. So and I always think that's top down. So I'm gonna just bring this up here and hopefully you can see it. So the shoulder pads on a Librarian are red, and I want to do a knee pad red as well, just for a bit of breakup and diversity on him. And I'm going to do the gun red as well. The cowling of the bolter red. So the sensible thing to do is to paint the red first, then mask it off, and then paint all of the blue. And in order to mask it off, the most effective thing to use by a country mile is simply blue tack. Blue tack works really well when you're masking off miniatures and you're airbrushing. It's important to note that we're going to need to use a matte varnish before we actually seal. So before we actually put the blue tack on, so we seal the paint working, we don't want the blue tack peeling off any paint. Obviously working with an airbrush, we're working nice and light. Actually need some airbrush thinners, haven't got any of that out. Not smart. And I'm going to use some Vallejo airbrush thinners. Even if it's an airbrush paint, I still like to run thinners through it because I believe it helps the flow. So let's quickly look at the colours we're going to use today. So for the red, we're going to use Scale 75 Deep Red, followed by Scale 75 Antares Red, followed by Scale 75 Oberon Red, followed by, that is an Army Painter War Paints Larvae Orange. I like to, when I'm doing this, and I'm going to do an army, I like to use a set rather than mixing. I like to use set colours so I know I can replicate them when I'm doing units and stuff like that for obvious reasons. For the blue, we're going to use the greatest colour ever, signed by my friend Ben Comets, which is Vallejo Dark Sea Blue. Then we're going to use Gain Colour Imperial Blue, Scale Colour Mediterranean Blue, and the fantasy scale colour of Joildrin Turquoise. Exciting. Okay, so I'm going to just pop these out of the way off camera, so it's going to get a bit boring for a second, and we'll get going. Right, So we're going to start with a base coat of Scale 75 Deep Red. This is the desaturated equivalent colour in the reds of the Dark Sea Blue. Dark Sea Blue is the most phenomenal desaturated colour to use for any sort of highlighting of black or basing upwards from a dark tone. So you've just seen there I've just added a fair squiz of the red in, and I'm just going to add a few drops of airbrush thinners. And I'm going to let's try and do all this on camera. So we can see there that's a pretty good consistency, and we're going to use the standard rule of thumb I use when I'm airbrushing, which is the rule of my thumb. So we're going to just bring some colour through, and we're going to just spray on the back of my hand. And remembering from the earlier videos, we're looking for this, which is a let me just put the paint down for a second. Let's look at my thumb. We're looking for a really lovely even colour coat that's not spidering or powdering, and that's actually perfect pressure. So I'm running my AS10 compressor at about 22 psi, and then on my fine adjust I've probably taken it down to about 18 just by tweaking it. So this is a really lovely colour to airbrush on, and this is ready to rock and roll now. So what we'll do is, let's just see if we can get the focus in the light. So what I'm going to do is start working just into the shoulder pads, just bringing in the colour. And this goes on quite vibrant, but then because it's a scale colour, it's a super matte, so it dries very dark. I'm going to be careful to get in all of the recesses. We don't want to be missing any areas. Okay, so there we've got the first shoulder pad done with the base coat, and it's looking quite shiny at the minute, but that will dry off very quickly. I'm going to just, while I'm here, blat in the bolter. I prefer to work in light coats and layer them up. There is times when I don't do that, when I deliberately work heavy, but in this instance I just want to give it a really nice smooth coverage. Okay, here we can see I need to increase the pressure a little bit. You can see it's powdered. So I've just chucked the pressure up a little bit and we're back to a nice residue. I obviously didn't quite mix the colour in there as quick as I would wanted to, as well as I wanted to, and it was starting to block the airbrush, and now we can see it's flowing again really nicely. So remember that the thicker the paint, the higher the pressure; the thinner the paint, the lower the pressure. It's a really useful rule of thumb to work from. Okay, so that's the bolter plotted in. I'm just going to do the knee pad, which is going to be nice and easy. What I'm really wanting to go for on this is stark contrast. Space Marines always look really good when they've got some quite striking stark contrasts on them. Okay, I'm going to just do the last shoulder pad. Now with the blue colours, it's not as important that I'm able to replicate them, because this is the only blue marine in the actual unit. Obviously he's the only librarian in a unit of Terminators. But the reds, it's really important that I can replicate this red that I'm going to do, this kind of unctuous red, because I'm going to use it on all of the other Terminators in his crew. I'm just going back over it and putting a quick saturation coat on, just to make sure it's done. Okay, so there we can see the Blood Angel's bolter, knee and shoulder pads have both been base coated with the nice desaturated red. And while that's drying, I'm going to show you just quickly how to dump, clean and airbrush. So this is a pot of mildly warm soapy water. I've just cleaned the brush in it, which is why it's pink. All I'm going to do now is dump the airbrush in. You can see the colour flood out, give it a shake, and then pull water through it and blow through the airbrush while it's in the water. Give it a bit of a shake, hold it near the edge and just flush it through. Pour out any residual colour, give it another quick flick and spray. Let's just move that out of the way. And then, first things first, dry it all off with a nice bit of kitchen towel. And then just blow it through onto the kitchen towel. Deep red is a really resilient colour actually. It's normally a colour would have come out by then. But deep red is a heavy pigment colour, so it takes a little bit more flushing to bring it through. Okay, and then from my water bowser I'm just going to put a tiny little bit of fresh water in. And I'm just going to blow through any fresh water, so now we've got a nice clean airbrush. Okay, much quicker than cleaning it a traditional way. When I do the next red, you'll see how much quicker it is. The deep red's a bad example. Okay, so the airbrush is ready for our next colour now. And the next colour we're going to use is a personal favourite of mine, which is Scale 75 Antares Red. It goes on looking incredible, it dries looking slightly less incredible, which is always a bit of an anticlimax for me, but you have to build it up in colours. Sorry, you have to build it up in layers. This is a good point, especially when you're using scale paints, they dry really claggy. You want to make sure that the nozzle top is clean before you pour any paint in, because you don't want to be passing any chunks of shite into your airbrush, which will clog it and ruin the whole process. Right, so that's a much thicker paint, so I'm going to add quite a chunk more thinner to it. And mix that up and follow the same rule of thumb. Just use the old paintbrush to get right down inside to where the needle aperture is. Really kind of mix it through, and then you want to have that nice kind of milky consistency again. But I'm not a big fan of saying it should be the consistency of milk, because each paint can be used in different ways, and its properties can be used in different ways. Okay, so now we're going to go back onto the hand and we're going to check. So going onto the hand and spraying in. Okay, so we can see that that is starting to feather a little bit, starting to spider a bit. Let's just do a bit more so you can see. See? So the paint is too thin, the pressure is too high for the thin paint. I'm just going to dial down the pressure a bit. And there we've gone back to our lovely smooth coverage. It's important that you test, your skin is honestly the best consistency for you to test this on. I'm always airbrushing on my hand whenever I'm painting, because it's just a beautiful smooth canvas, and you can really feel literally whether or not the paint's right. So as you can see now, bringing him back in, that deep red is dried, very matte and very desaturated, which is what we want. I'm going to take a light source from above right. That's kind of how I do most of my miniatures. I'm a big fan of above right. I'm going to start to use the airbrush to our advantage now, and I'll start with the bolter. So I'm going to, you can see that yet, I'm just going to work that red quite strongly just onto the bolter casing, and then I'm going to do the same on the shoulder pad, because this is only the layer colour, this isn't anywhere near a highlight colour yet. Okay, and then the knee. And then the other shoulder I'm going to work from the top, because I do want there to be quite a strong contrast on this shoulder. I'm going to work on the top here and make sure we've got enough saturation. Okay. That's nice. Okay, let's just put that down for a second and have a look at the miniature on camera with the focus in. Okay, so here you can start to see on this side it's much more sort of smooth, but then you can start to see the transitions fading here. When this red dries, it'll be much smoother. But on this shoulder pad, you can see in particular it's glossy because it's still drying. We're going to use, actually I'll do that on camera so you can see what we're talking about. If I just run air through, so the Antares red starts off looking really vibrant, but as it dries it mats up. So that looked like a very unsubtle contrast between the two. And actually, when you dry it off, the fade is quite nice, and I'm just going to feather it in a bit though. Just a little bit more. Okay. It's quite a quick process doing the red, obviously. Off camera now I'm just dunking and cleaning the red like I showed you before. There we go. Just going to dry the airbrush up again, and you can see on this one the colour, which is a much lower pigment size, it's come through and is mostly gone. So I'm just going to put that kind of little flush of fresh water into it. I'm going to blow it out. And there we go, that's clean and ready to go again. And obviously much quicker than using a cleaning tub and spraying it through. I'm not a big fan of those. I should be wearing a respirator today, or I should actually have the extraction system on, but it won't let you won't be able to hear me, so I'm risking my life and limb for you. So that's the first two reds done. The next colour we're going to go for is how do you pronounce that? Aldebaran red, not Alderon, Aldebaran. Maybe that's how you actually say Alderon. I guess it's maybe a Star Wars reference. This one is not a colour I use very often, actually. It's not one of my staple go-tos, but it's got quite a nice orangey hue. I'm just going to squeeze out any crap that might have been in it, because it's been sat for a while. I'm going to put some colour in. So I'll bring this up onto camera. You can see this one's got quite a nice kind of orange hue to it. And we're going to repeat the process. Instead of doing this in one really long video, what I'll do is do the classic thing of uploading it in a series of videos, probably when it gets to the completion of each stage, so you don't have to listen to me waffle too much. So just lost a brush hair in there, but managed to scoot it out. This is really thin, this paint. To the point where it will spider really easily, and that's not what we want at all. So I under-thinned it, or over-thinned it a bit. So what I'm going to do is turn the pressure right down, and then we're back onto this nice kind of glaze consistency again. This is going to take a couple of coats though, because it's thinner than I wanted it to be. In fact, just to speed things up, let me just add a bit more pigment into it. It's probably the quickest way of doing it, rather than faffing around doing it in 4 coats. It's wasting paint, but it's better for a viewing public, I guess. I really appreciate everybody who takes the time to watch these videos. It's nice to know, and people come up to me now and talk to me about them, and they're crap videos made in my studio, which is a log cabin in the garage in the garden. But it's nice that people are getting something out of them. Okay. So if we look on the paper here when I spray, focus. Oh, it's like on my hand. We've got a nice smooth coat again. Okay. So now I'm going to, from the direction of light, I'm going to pick out the bolter with this much brighter red. And the amount of contrast I'm using on the shoulder pads has got to be mirrored on the blue. And I want the blue to be really quite stark contrast. So now I'm just working in the brightest areas. And again, this colour goes on looking quite bright and then dries super matte. That's less than ideal. Just spatter there. Let's just dry that in. And I want to have to feather that spatter in, which is annoying. Okay, where I'd added the new pigment, it had reached the needle and the consistency of the paint changed, which is fine. It just means I had to do something about it and change the pressure on the airbrush. Okay, I'm just going to dry this in now, and you can see it's looking a lot more vibrant. Again, it looks really super stark and you go, oh my god, when you put it on, and then once it's dried in it's a lot softer. We've still got a nice contrast. I'm just going to accentuate that and smooth it off a little bit. One more on the knee. Okay, let's dump that colour. And again, that quick clean that out to be comfortably usable again now. Okay, so let's have a look at the miniature in terms of where we're at the minute. So you can see the strongest point of light is here. And then if we go around to the negative side, you can see the fades on the armour. There you go, that's probably the best angle. With the light, with the white light source in here, it looks a bit starker than it actually is. It's kind of a nice gradual fade. Right, Larvae Orange. This is quite a large pigment paint from memory. I don't use the war paints very often anymore. But sometimes they're useful. I do use the war paint inks constantly. Their tone stuff. Ooh, look at that. It's like, oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to That just squirted everywhere, so I'm going to scoot that in with the brush rather than wasting a whole load more paint. But before I do that, let's just make sure there's no foreign bodies in it. That's okay. Yeah, good. That's a nice colour actually. It's way too orange in terms of a traditional final coat for a Blood Angel, but we're going to do some filtering and stuff. Okay, so we do want this colour to be quite thin. Because this is almost a glaze we're applying over the top as a filter colour, just to change the colours of the pigments underneath. So we don't want the actual orange to be a completely saturated layer. That would overkill what we're trying to do. So if you look and spraying on this moisture wicking paper, you can see that it's very thin. And if I put it on my hand, it would spider really easily. So I'm going to turn the pressure on the airbrush right down. Turn it back up a little bit, it's a bit too low. There we go. And we're back into that situation now where the airbrush is running at a nice consistency. We're not getting any spidering or any powdering on our hand when we spray, and it's not overly foggy. Okay, so let's just bring him in, and again from the absolute light source, I'm going to put a very thin coat on, and this colour is not a super matte, so this is going to fundamentally change the way the pigments underneath it work because it's a satin colour. So you might hear this described as candying. I'm spraying a candy orange filter over the top of the red. Okay, that's nice and bright. I'm going to just put another coat of that on. From the very light source. And we're done. Blatting out the orange colour now. Oops, excuse me. And I want to make sure this is a lot more cleaned now. So I've flushed it through, fresh water's going in. There we are. Nice and clean, ready to rock. And that's 28 minutes on the video. We should get to 30 and then I'll stop and start the second part, I think. So let's just dry it off. That's what happens when you don't loop. The trigger was sticking. So I'm just going to dry off the knee. Ooh, okay, so let's bring this in and have a look at him. It's a nice strong contrast there, but the armour's still got its nice deep red that we want it to have. And now I'm going to show you a crazy trick, and we're going to get some Games Workshop Lamenter's Yellow glaze, which is an absolute favourite colour of mine, and we're just going to put a couple of drops off the end of the airbrush, off the end of the paintbrush into the airbrush, and we're not going to thin it because you don't need to thin the glazes because they're already glazes. And this is going to come out as a nice, look at that, it's a lovely colour, it really is. There's no need to test it because it's, you know, it's going to be thin, and my pressure was already on a thin. And we're going to take the marine back again. Focus. Okay, and I am going to put a spot filter of yellow over the point of absolute light. Now, using a filter colour or a candy colour, and a candy colour is simply a very thin colour with a translucent pigment. So it's not a super heavy quality pigment, it's a much finer pigment. And with a candy colour you're able to do what's called filtering, and we're able to change the properties of the paint underneath by applying a filter between that paint and the paint that your eye sees. So what you can see now is the red has really popped and the fades have softened even more, and that's a nice dark brooding red for the Blood Angels. So they're not soft, they're not sort of bright orange silly Blood Angels, they're nice and dark and broody, and then the transition rolls with the light. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, while this part of the video is here, is I'm very quickly going to just matte varnish this, and then I will mask off the red and we will come back. I'll do that off camera so I don't bore you to tears. Once the red is masked off, I will prepare and we'll do the blues. So just mixing the varnish in exactly the same way, a bit of Vallejo matte varnish and a bit of the thinner. It is vital that you varnish a miniature that you've airbrushed. I can't stress that enough. Never not varnish a miniature that you've airbrushed, especially if you are going to be masking it. It just takes a couple of seconds, but after you've done all this lovely work, if you were to put a mask on it and it peeled off the paintwork, I'm pretty sure you'd be pissed. In fact, I know you would be, because, oops, there was a lot of varnish, because I have done it to myself and been very pissed indeed. There's also a lot of varnish. Okay, he's now varnished. When you run varnish through your airbrush, even if it's water based, you need to give it a really good clean. And obviously everything I'm doing today is water based, and I'm going to just run some Media airbrush cleaner just through in the same way I would do with the water previously. So I'm going to just spray that in there. I'm going to put it in its holder just to soak for 2 or 3 minutes while the paintwork is drying, and then I'm going to just blot it through and clean it. So this is where we're at currently. Obviously it's very shiny because the varnish is on and wet, but it will dry matte. When we come back, I'll have masked these bits off quite carefully with blue tack, and we'll be ready to do the blue paintwork. So thanks very much for watching part 1. Stay tuned for part 2.